Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another top 5 Total War video, this time covering the top 5 sieges in a Total War game. So that's taking into consideration the quality of the maps, the quality of the AI, both in attack and defense, and the amount of options that you have during an attack or defensive sieges in a Total War game. So with that being defined, let's now get straight into number 5. Coming in at number 5 are the sieges for Rome Total War. So there's quite a lot you can do during a siege, offensively and defensively, in Rome Total War. There's also a great deal of difference between sieging a tiny little village, with maybe a wooden palisade, and besieging a huge city with epic stone walls, as we're seeing right here. Epic stone wall towers have ballistas on them, which can seriously do a lot of damage very quickly. In addition to that, Rome Total War is one of the only Total War games in which you can actually capture the towers yourself, and have the towers fire back into the city onto its own defenders, meaning that sometimes holding the walls can be very important for the defenders, lest the towers come into their hands. There's also boiling oil, if you want to go through the front here with some rams, and the options for using artillery are there as well. And Rome Total War is the only Total War game in where you could use a sap point to dig underneath the walls and destroy them, essentially without harming your own men. Now, that does have some drawbacks. The AI on the wall is very passive. They will stay where they initially deploy, so if you just go around them and attack from anywhere else along the wall, you can go and capture all the other sections of wall, open up the other gates without even having to worry about them. They won't try to spot you. They'll stay in their initial position pretty much no matter what until you're in the city, at which point they'll get off the walls. So the AI in the defense of their cities is not the best, but it's also not the worst. The AI, when attacking a settlement, usually just goes pretty much head on, and they can be pretty bad at assaulting settlements, especially if you've got sufficient defenses like the Epic Stone Wall. And that's why it's getting the number 5 slot. So anyway, let's now move on to the number 4 pick. Coming in at number 4 are the sieges for Total War Shogun 2, and the main reason it's getting this slot is because the defensive sieges are quite enjoyable. Attacking a settlement as the player, I find them to be pretty boring because the AI is very passive, but defending a settlement, that's the entire opposite experience because the AI is not passive. They make it their mission to get up on the walls very quickly. In addition to that, because the settlements, or the forts I suppose, are so small and the armies in Shogun 2 are quite large, they really do make an effort to spread their forces around and attack from all sides, which can be quite challenging because you got to keep your eye on all these positions. Now, a thing about Shogun 2 as well, especially with layered castles, as the game continues, as the settlements get bigger and bigger and more interesting, the central plaza, or the topmost part of the fort, is the only area in which your troops have unlimited morale. So leaving low morale troops into the outer sections can be a big mistake. Having your archers up on the upper section might be the way to go because they're usually the units that will break first if they go into melee or take too much damage. So there are quite a lot of options that are available to you to try to get that win, knowing your terrain and knowing your enemy where they're strongest to attack from, when to decide to strike at that enemy general, causing that mass rout. All of these options add to the enjoyment of defending the settlements. And as I said, the bigger these settlements get, the more enjoyment you get out of them. Now, there isn't a whole lot of variety in these siege maps. Oftentimes, in different locations on the campaign, you will find yourself fighting the same siege maps multiple times. But that's something that's a common occurrence throughout all Total War games. And for the fact that this is only based in Japan, there is only one culture, there is, I suppose, a reasonable amount of variety when it comes to these sieges. So that's why it's getting the number 4 slot. Let's now move on to number 3. Coming in at number 3 are the sieges for Total War Attila. So one of the big things that has to be mentioned for the sieges in Total War Attila is siege escalation. If you're the attacker, and you're going up against a defender that could probably repel your forces, it might be an interesting thing to do to burn the settlement to the ground. Because as we've seen in this scenario here, this city is very badly damaged, and that's making my soldiers fight like absolute crap. And as the player, if you're going up against an enemy, you can do that to the enemy as well. In addition to that, the sheer variety of of maps that you could potentially fight on in Total War Attila is probably one of the largest in terms of variety. There's different sizes when it comes down to, walled settlements. There's different cultures. There's port settlements. There's unwalled settlements as well, which those minor settlements can eventually build walls of their own. So there's a lot of different varieties and different scenarios that you can encounter in these sieges. And in Total War Attila, you will be fighting a lot of siege battles, whether being attacking or defending. I've often called Total War Attila Total War Defensive Siege, because on Legendary difficulty you will be fighting a lot of enemies that will be coming to attacking your settlements. A lot of these will be just your garrisons. So when you take all this into consideration, I think the sieges in Total War Attila are actually pretty decent. Even though I've been very critical of Total War Attila overall in the past, the sieges are done pretty well. Anyway, let's now move on to number 2. Coming in at number 2 is a game that I don't think many people expected me to even put on this list. It's not a game that I mention much these days, but it's actually Thrones of Britannia. In my opinion, Thrones of Britannia has the second best sieges in any Total War game. And the main reason I think that is because of the siege maps that are actually in this game. It's got such a huge variety of maps, and it's not just the variety, it's the uniqueness of this map. Now, in most Total War games, sieges consist of a square fortification that you can assault from multiple sides. But in Thrones of Britannia, they vary wildly. So taking this particular map into consideration, just forget about the battles going on here, that's not important, right now at least. The size of the siege map is pretty huge, considering what a minor game this really is in the Total War franchise, and the fact that this is just one of many different styles in Thrones of, in the actual game. Now, this is definitely something that I applaud with this game that I really didn't get a lot of chance to check when I was first playing it, because I was auto-resolving a lot of my battles and getting pissed off with that. Thrones of Britannia has got some massive problems with it, no doubt about it, but this actual siege maps are not one of them. So you've got 2 outer layers here before you get up into the upper area here. So if you want to, you could keep falling back, and as you go back, the AI has to keep, or whoever's attacking, has to keep going up the hill, getting more and more exhausted as they go. And again, this is just one out of many maps. They range from being tiny to huge to being weird ways of getting up. And generally speaking, the AI doesn't really derp out as much as in other Total War games. And that being said as well, there aren't a whole lot of variety of unit types in this game. It's mostly just consisted of various different melee troops and archers. It does have some cavalry, but not a whole lot. There is artillery, but it doesn't really do a whole lot. But overall, the overall experience and how much fun the sieges are in Thrones of Britannia is exceptionally high. It's probably the height of Thrones of Britannia is actually in its sieges. And you wouldn't hear me praise this game very often, that's for sure. I still really don't like it. But credit where credit's due, they did do an excellent job on the sieges, and that's why it's getting the number 2 slot. Now let's talk about the game that has the best sieges in any Total War game.
To arms, my lord! The enemy's ram has breached the gates!
Coming in at number 1 are the sieges for Medieval 2 Total War. And the primary reason for that is just content. There is so much content to the sieges in Medieval 2, more so than any other Total War game. And there's things that are in this that no other Total War game even has. So let's start at the basics first. There are 2 different types of settlements. There's cities and castles, and then each of those have about 5 different levels. So, from village to huge city, from Motte and Bailey to Citadel. So over here we're fighting on a Citadel. So this is the most difficult sieging settlement that you can go up against, where it's got 2 outer layers of defenses before it gets into a very tight inner layer defense. Now, unlike in Thrones of Britannia, there is no army loss penalty. You can't just beat the enemy force enough that the units hanging at the back here will just run. When a unit routes in this game, it routes to the town square, and that's where you're going to have to fight them, where they'll fight to the death. Only Rome 1 and Medieval 2 have that. Arguably Empire, but Empire sieges, they didn't even get a spot on this list because they just plainly suck. Now, it's not just the number of settlement types you can go up against. I mean, as far as the cultures are concerned, there are a couple, but everything's layered more or less the same. You know, if you're going up against an Easternist settlement, they're more or less designed the same. Okay, but in addition to you know, the sheer number of settlements that you can go up against, there's also the number of things that you can do during a siege, and the things that the AI brings during the sieges. Medieval 2 spans one of the longest periods in a Total War game, covering 400 years. So you start the campaign having access to artillery such as ballista and trebuchets, and eventually moving up to cannons which absolutely melt walls. Now the AI will not just do what it does in other Total War games and send its forces immediately as soon as the siege begins, right up on the walls even while their artillery is firing. The AI is a little bit more patient, and it will blow down sections of walls before it even begins the main assault, and preserve some of its ammunition for subsequent layers. So I'm almost certain that these guys here have not used up their ammunition and they're saving it for later. In addition to that, there are, you know, 3 different types of siege equipment. There's rams, ladders, and siege towers. It's not the most we've ever seen in a Total War game. You know, in Rome Total War, they've got sap points. In Medieval 2, there isn't sap points. But one thing that Medieval 2 does do that Rome 1 doesn't is allows the attacker to remove the ladders off the wall when they're done with them. So if you're attacking, you know, a concentric castle, which is what this is, you can, you know, bring the ladders up on the wall, attack, take the wall, get your men back down off the ladders, take the ladders off the wall, and then move on to the next section, which no other Total War game allows. And, you know, they don't pull ladders out of their arse like in the latest Total War games. So you do actually need to properly build them. Now, that being said, when you're defending a siege in Medieval 2, you've probably got a really good chance of winning, because the AI, although it will make technically some wise decisions, you can catch them out on their bad decisions and beat them on that pretty easily. So, in terms of challenge, defending a settlement can actually be pretty easy. But attacking a castle against the AI in Medieval 2, it probably has one of the best defending AIs in a Total War game, because the AI actually responds to every decision that you make. If you set up your troops over here at the front, they'll put their troops up at the front, but if you move them, they'll move their troops. If you take the walls, they'll start to withdraw. Oftentimes, even when you're coming and you've got a lot of artillery, they'll just abandon walls entirely, knowing full well that they can't protect it. So in terms of defending settlements, the AI is one of the best out of any Total War games, whereas other Total War games is extremely passive. So coupled with all of the different content and the AI and just the sheer amount of enjoyment that you can get out of a siege in Medieval 2, this is why, in my opinion, there is no other candidate for the #1 slot than Medieval 2. And that's why it's getting the #1 slot. Anyway, that's my top 5 pick. Let me know what you think. If you think that another game deserved a spot on this list, if you think another game deserved the top spot, let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next video, fuckers.